So in this video we're going to be taking a look at the actual camera and some of the settings that we can adjust. Today I'm going to be using this Sony camera, but these settings are global, they're universal. It doesn't really matter what kind of camera you're on. We're going to be taking a look at what kind of parameters we can change and what they mean. Okay, so one of the first things that we're probably going to come across on most cameras is the resolution. So this is where we're going to be choosing between 1080 or 4K or 6K, whatever kind of options we have. So on this camera I have the option of 4K and I have the option of HD. HD will often be used as a general term for 1080. So here I'm just going to choose 1080 and then coming down one we have the frame rate. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in the UK we shoot at 25 frames. That's our kind of standard speed shooting. And this is basically known as PAL. So you have NTSC and PAL, and this is basically just to do with territories. So in the US they shoot on NTSC, and in the UK, Europe, we shoot on PAL. So if you do come to your camera and you don't see the option of 25, it might just be that you need to go a bit deeper into your settings and make sure that your camera is set to PAL. We have the option of 25, 50 and 100. 25 is normal speed, 50 is slow motion, and then 100p is even more slow motion. So if we were just doing a normal shoot, we would probably be selecting 25p for that one. So next setting that we'd probably want to take a look at is the focus. So often we'd have the option on camera, on body, to choose between manual focus and autofocus. This particular lens is only a manual lens, so this is actually grayed out on this camera. You might also find that there's a switch on a physical body on the lens somewhere that switches between manual and auto. Coupled with that is the idea of where it's going to focus. So even if it is autofocus, you won't find that it's just automatic. You have to kind of tell it what it's going to be focusing on. So wide is a really great kind of catch-all. You'll see from the symbol there that it's basically just going to kind of capture a bit of everything. It's going to take a wide image and decide what it thinks it wants in focus. One thing that I would say is that with the more modern cameras, that these autofocuses are just getting better and better, and things like detecting the human eye, it's getting really good at. So yeah, autofocus is really quite powerful these days. So yeah, other focus modes are zone, center, which is obviously at the center of the image, and then flexible spot is another one that I use quite a lot, which is where you can basically choose a spot to focus on, and then you can move that around. So if your subject is on the right hand side of the screen, you can choose that as a spot to focus on. Now, something that we talked about in the last video was the exposure triangle. Those are the three kind of key important settings that we're going to need to look at. And to recap, that's the shutter speed, the aperture and the ISO. So yeah, you'll find those obviously on different cameras in various places. Often, because these things are so important, you'll find them on kind of main cogwheels and things. So shutter speed on these is controlled via that cog. Aperture often by that cog, but not in this case because this is a manual lens. So on here we can actually see that the aperture is controlled via this ring, and we can see those numbers that we'd expect to see. But yeah, on many cameras, if you're using more kind of digital based lenses, you might find that a cog here changes the aperture, this changes the shutter speed. And looking at more cinema based, we would end up probably having a cog also for ISO. But in this case, the ISO is detailed on this body, so we just press it there and then find it there. So often on cameras you'd find that there's like one button which would give you quick access to the most desirable parameters. So on Sony's that's labelled as FN, on a Canon here it's labelled as Q set, but yeah, it'll often be different brands labelling it different things, but you are pretty much always going to have a quick access menu, and that's going to control some of the things we've been through already. So things like the focus mode, where we're focusing, things like the ISO, the aperture, the shutter speed, they're often going to be on one kind of section. So other things we've got on here then, so we've got the white balance. Essentially we can kind of look at images and define them as yellow or blue, and that's to do with kelvins. So on our white balance we'll often have an auto white balance, which is absolutely fine to use. It's normally pretty intelligent with those kind of things. daylight, shade, cloudy, incandescent, and various kind of other settings. If you did want to manually go in there, then you would find normally something which would be labeled as K, and then you'd be able to change the kelvins, which will be in ranging from thousands of numbers. So, you know, around 3,200 Kelvin kind of thing might be a kind of natural light. But yeah, that's all to do with your settings, you know, where you are. You know, if you're in a room that has particularly blue light, then you might need to readjust your white balance so that it's kind of looking a little bit more natural. You've also got some kind of presets there. So, you know, often here, for example, I've got custom 1, 2, 3, and I can set those depending on what I want those presets to do and then use them that way. But yeah, auto white balance, it really is fine. In most situations, you're probably going to be absolutely fine on that. If you look down, you know, onto your camera and it's looking super blue, that might be a situation where you want to come in here, come to the kelvins and just manually adjust until you think it's looking a little bit more natural. So the next thing I want to briefly talk about is the picture profile. And the picture profile is really where we're going to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of how the image looks. One kind of term that you might hear a lot when people talk about picture profiles is log, and you'll get this on various different cameras, whether that's Canon or Sony. Sony call it S-Log, but you'll find it called different things on different kind of manufacturers. But essentially that's a very flat profile. So when it comes to post-production, what that's going to mean is you've got a lot more flexibility in terms of dealing with the colors and dealing with exposure. But when it comes to post-production, it means you have more work to do. So generally speaking, you know, if you have picture profile off, this is obviously just you know, the default preset that the manufacturers of these cameras have decided is probably a good thing for most people to shoot in. If you're in a position where you're developing, you know, your skills as a videographer and you want to kind of have a bit more flexibility and control over that look, picture profiles is where you're going to go and mess around with settings. It's probably a bit too advanced for these tutorials, but yeah, various obviously videos out there on YouTube where you can explore picture profiles. So the final thing I want to look at is formatting, and you'll find that between different kind of manufacturers of camera, they might want the SD to be, you know, ready to write in a particular way. So for that reason, it's good practice to just format SD cards when you're putting them in. Obviously in advance, making sure that there's nothing on there that you need, but yeah, jumping into the camera, formatting SD cards is good practice. You'll often see it labeled as initialize. So yeah, initialize or format is the kind of thing that you'd be looking out for, and that's basically just wiping the SD card so it's ready to record on.